Welcome back to Horror Score with Jesse.
And Vanessa.
This is episode 10.
Z.
And we have something very special planned for this
We
episode.
got Brandon Christensen, the director
yes.
and co-writer, to do an interview for us to answer some of our biggest questions that we had after our watch.
Yeah, which was our first watch. We had never seen the movie. We saw some
Came out
buzz
in
about it.
2019.
Yeah.
We watched it on Shudder.
That's why it's not in front of us.
Right.
I would buy it, though.
I would buy it.
Well, we're going to go to that interview. So, stay tuned. Cool. Well, again, yeah, thanks for coming and giving us some time. We both had a bunch of questions that we wanted to throw at you, and we appreciate having the opportunity to do so. One of the things I was wondering is this Z character, if he has other families that he's also working on simultaneously, or if he is only a problem for this family.
I think he's only a problem for the Parsons family. I do think that, there's a lot of things that we left in the film that are left vague enough for you to sort of come up with your own conclusion as to how far down the family tree he goes.
Right.
Because, if you look at sort of the similarities between what happens with Beth and what we allude to happening when she was a child, and she had Z, and her own father, and just the way that how her father ended up. I think there's definitely a case to be made that it's not just Josh and Beth, that it could be going down further. I think it talks a lot about sort of nature versus nurture, and just the idea of, passing down traits to your family member, whether it be like a hereditary disease or anything like that. I do definitely think that Z is very much related to this one family, though.
I love that you were talking about things being hereditary and passed down through traits. The movie reminded me a lot of the Babadook in the sense that it just kind of feels like grief, like unfinished business, like stuff that she packed up and in her mom's house, basically, and that she was finally sorting through, and then this monster comes out, kind of thing.
That's really intentional. I mean, she's definitely, you see her interacting with her mother, and her clearly don't have a good relationship. She tries to help her by putting her hand on hers, and her mom just pulls away and recoils. Her sister doesn't want to come visit the mom. I mean, it's definitely very intentional to say to this, to say to the audience, this family isn't right. Why? Basically. And then as she goes back into her childhood, when her mother dies, and she's able to kind of look into the basement where her past is kept, she starts to remember things, because it's been 30 some odd years since she's had this traumatic event that she's sort of blocked away mentally. But yeah, it's definitely about kind of coming to terms with things that you hid away, and you didn't allow yourself to properly grieve, or you didn't allow yourself to properly process when you were young. It's just like bottling this up, and at the end everything kind of pours out, and makes a giant mess.
Would you or are you at all planning or thinking of possibly a prequel or sequel?
No, I think this story tells everything that we wanted to tell. It's funny, I've been asked that a lot, and the ending, especially like the very, very ending, a lot of people think it's kind of like sequel bait. But to me, I feel like it's pretty conclusive, because if you remember earlier in the film when the gerbil die, or not the gerbil, it's a hedgehog. The hedgehog dies. Joshua says goodnight to it, and she's like, "Are you sure you want to still say goodnight to it?" And he says, "Just because he's gone doesn't mean he can't hear me." So it's almost like he's alluding to something happening potentially there, whether it's heaven or something like that. And so at the end of the film, when he does the same nights to himself, he includes Z, he includes the dad. So it's like, does that mean Z's still around? I don't know. I mean, what she attempted at the end, did that work? Or did the fact that she didn't, finish the job, so to speak, is Z still around? So to me, it's very much like the Inception ending, where if the dreidel top had fallen and it gave you a conclusive answer, there's nothing really to talk about anymore. You're just like, oh, okay, it was all a dream, or oh, okay, it wasn't a dream.
Was there anything that was in the original script that you had to cut out for whatever reason, timing constraints, filming budget, that broke your heart?
Not really that broke my heart, but the script had a ton of scenes. Like, it had around 185 scenes, and we shot every single scene. but there's probably about 30 to 35 on the cutting room floor. There was one good scene that we had to cut. I mean, for story reasons, but also because we forgot to shoot half of it. So basically, there was a hide and seek sequence with Josh and Beth, where she's trying to, play with the kid. This was before play zone, and she basically is playing hide and seek and searching for him everywhere, and she gets really frustrated that she can't find him, and she's giving up, and then she feels the door behind her, like to Josh's room, close, and so she goes in, and she does, earlier in the film with the train eyes in the closet.
Yeah.
We revisited that, and she's doing it again, but this time, like, the train is not, she's moved the train, so it was off to the side. And it was going to have a little jump scare, and she's going to fall, and then Josh runs up behind her. She's like, "Oh, you found Z," and that was kind of like just like a moment that shook her. And the same thing essentially story-wise happens with the play zone, where she's seeing something for the first time. But the reason why we didn't shoot it all was because it was basically because we didn't have, like, we had Keegan Connor Tracy for the entire shoot, but we didn't have Josh Jet Klein for the entire thing. So we basically were like, okay, well, we don't have the kid for this day, and we need to fill it with scenes, so we'll shoot this direction for this scene, and then the next week when we have Jet, we'll shoot the other side. And so we shot the one direction. We shot like the whole way through, but we didn't ever shoot the reverse, which we needed to finish the scene. So we have like half of it shot, and the other half just didn't exist. So when I was editing the film, I was just like, uh-oh. So that was kind of a bummer. But yeah, I actually have, I put up deleted scenes, or maybe I haven't posted them yet, but I've got the deleted scenes reel from the film, and part of that hide and seek sequence is on it.
Is there ever a possibility of throwing that together in the future, like a director's cut that's available, or you think it'll always just be download these scenes, check them out?
It'll always just be download these scenes. I mean, I edited the film, so the cut of the film is basically the director's cut.
Oh.
Nice. Well, you just mentioned your oldest son is 8, and I'm not a parent, but I am a writer, and we pull a lot of things from our real lives, obviously, and just have to wonder if this whole terrifying imaginary friend thing came from something like a real life fear of yours that you were scared you might have to deal with your son.
Yes, pretty much. I mean, basically the answer to that is, when I had done Stillborn already, and that drew on a lot of the things that we went through as parents with our son, our second son that was a baby when we wrote it. But with Z, I was kind of, after Stillborn came out, I was trying to think of sort of what's the next evolution of that idea of parental fear and everything like that. And my oldest son at the time was going into kindergarten, and the first time you drop off your kid at kindergarten, it's kind of an emotional experience, because for the first time, from Monday to Friday, from 8 a.m. to 2:30 p.m., you don't have that kid anymore. There's like an emptiness at the house. And the weird part is, when you go and pick them up for the first time, and every time after that, they return home with a bunch of new ideas and new thoughts and new feelings and all these things that you don't control anymore. So my wife and I were looking at that and just like discussing, like, that's kind of, it's kind of strange. Like, what if they brought home something with them that you don't have control over, and it's kind of taking over the kid, and we didn't know what that was. And then my wife's friend, she actually has a daughter with an imaginary friend that was, had different personalities and things like that. It was just like part of the family now, and they were living with it. But what if, and you kind of fall down the traps of like, what if it was real? And so that was kind of the genesis of the whole idea. And yeah, just sort of turned into like, okay, well, you have to take it just from an imaginary friend to the next level. And what's the next level? The next level is, it was the mom's imaginary friend, it was that first, and it's trying to get her back. And so then you start going down that sort of that, those ideas there, and you kind of end up with Z.
Was he always so opposed to whole milk? That was such a great, like, creative, just from like a writing standpoint, to give somebody, or a villain, such a great quirk.
Just a lot of conversations with Colin when we were writing kind of the other drafts, and I think he threw it out there like he should really like 2% milk, and so it was just this dumb thing that kept evolving in the script, and it's become something that people talk about a lot. Like, it gets referenced a lot, which is hilarious because it is just a little character quirk, but it does give Z a little bit of a personality. And it's pretty funny. I think it's really stupid, but to me it's really funny.
Yeah, it was interesting. That was one of the things that made Z feel like a young child, like that kind of insistence in the milk. But then in later scenes with Beth in the house, it was very much like an abusive husband role. So it was weird how this villain was able to morph between those two types.
Right, for sure.
Did you imagine that Z told Beth or even one of Beth's parents that his name was Z, or did one of those people name him Z?
That's a good question. I mean, the only answer I can really give is the way that we came up with it, and that was like that first conversation when we were talking about imaginary friend. We were like, is the imaginary friend a boy or a girl? And then we're like, I don't know. We'll say, it's a variable that we don't have right now. Let's call it X, or Y or Z. And so we basically just labeled it Z for the time being until we figured out what it was. And I was kind of just up late that night writing some random ideas for the script, and just like started a Google document, just started firing in some like random ideas, like, oh, a kid's toy that can repeat a letter. And then it was like, well, we have Z. And so that became a thing. And it was just like, okay, well, that's interesting. What else can we use if it was just a single letter? And it just sort of like, an hour after we had come up with it, it just sort of felt right. And it has this creepy vibe to it. It just never really changed or evolved. And so I don't know if I have to imagine that one of the characters at some point in time named it, because they are conversing with them behind closed doors and stuff. But I'm not sure who, but to me, it's just a really creepy name.
Awesome. We were shocked about 20 minutes in when that thud happens.
Oh, it was so wonderful.
That was, we were like, oh, all right. It's going to be that kind of movie. All right. But yeah, both of us were like,
I was like an imaginary friend story. Like, that's great. Those can be done well. And then the thud, I was like, oh, it's new. It's different. This is not your sheepish imaginary friend that doesn't come out of the closet.
To me as a parent, like the scariest thing is when you go somewhere, or you're even at your own house and you look up there and they're like, hey mom, look. And you look up and there's the banisters, and you're just like, stay away from there. They pull pillows up or something like that. You're just like, that's such a primal fear for any parent. I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but I feel pretty strongly that most parents would be like, I hate it when they're by that thing, because they can easily tumble over, and it's such a terrible thing. So that was an idea that just like had to be in it because it's such an iconic parental fear. So yeah, that and when it happens in the film, it's so hilarious. But and we know what we didn't really know what the effect would be for the audience, because initially it wasn't supposed to go down 2 floors. The house that we shot in was actually the next door neighbor of the house, like the main house, and it was just the only one we could get. And so we were there for half a day, and at first it was like, well, we don't see the kid land here, because it was supposed to land in the background in like this broken body type of thing. But we were stuck with, this 2-level thing. And so the way we made it work was by throwing it at the banister, and it makes that thud, which is, it's become kind of the calling card for the film, which is really funny. But I didn't know it. I mean, it wasn't until the first screening that we had where I felt the reaction, where I was just like, oh, interesting. Like, that's going to be the thing. Like, there's always, in Stillborn, there's the baby monitor scare that gets everybody because it's out of nowhere. And then on this, it was that, and people kept talking about it, and it continues to be talked about now. So it's always kind of funny that you don't know which is going to be. I always thought it was going to be the bathtub.
Well, it was big for her. She was like, oh my God.
I had to pause it. I had rewinded and paused right when he was there, just because, it's that it goes away so fast that fear would have stayed with me for a long time. But if I can rewind, pause, I can see its whole figure.
It's a good way to do it, for sure. Just to be like, okay, that's what it is. I know what it is now.
There's some makeup okay, this is great practical effects, but it's not real.
For sure. Yeah. So it's always funny that you never know what's going to sort of be the thing that works until you see it with an audience. So that was cool to see.
I don't know. I guess this is just kudos, but just as a story writer, did you have any special like schooling or training or anything, because it was just so tight?
Just after Stillborn, I learned a lot from writing that with Colin, and Colin and I were able to really kind of mine some cool ideas. But a lot of it also does come out of the edit. Like when you have we probably have a lot more exposition in the script than the film does, because what ends up happening is that the actors do such a good job of telling some of the minutia of the story that you don't really need to be told certain things. So it is kind of nice to just allow the audience to play catch up a little bit on certain things. Like you don't have to over explain stuff where you become like the architect in the Matrix Reloaded, where you're just like, okay, I get it, move on,
Just holding their hand, like
yeah, audiences are smart, and so I think it's better to let them play catch up than it is for them to be like, okay, I get it, let's keep going, So it is a very tightly paced movie, and a lot of the stuff was cut out that kind of maybe over explain certain things, but yeah, I think it's when you make a film, you're kind of writing it 3 times. You write it in the script process. You write it when you rewrite things as you're shooting and you've got limited resources, and then you're rewriting it again when you're doing the edit. And I mean, if you were to read the script, you'd notice like there's a lot of differences in between the edit and the script form, because just certain things don't work when they work better on the page than they do when in the film itself.
Well,
that's great.
We look forward to the next one.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
And there was our interview. The actual interview was about 30 minutes. We tried to cut it down the best we could to keep the episode under 20 minutes if possible.
Yeah, but he was very generous with his time to spend half an hour video chatting through a cold.
And to accept our offer, he had never even heard of Horror Score, because we haven't even released our first episode yet. Yeah. And he was like, yeah, let's do it. So again, that was very nice of him. So we thank him. So we're going to get into the scoring. So the first part, there are 5 categories.
Story.
First category is story. So getting into it, it seemed like a story we've seen before. There's some kind of evil force, and we're kind of navigating through it, trying to piece it together. But it took some twists and turns, and it hooked me. And I kept waiting to see what was going to happen next. I felt it was there was some parts of it that were like the Babadook. There was some parts of it that reminded me of some other movies. But all in all, it was also it was original as well. I gave it a 14 out of 20.
I gave it a 13 out of 20. At first, I was like, oh, I think this is going to be kind of like your average imaginary friend horror story, like hide and seek and that kind of thing. But it definitely delivered, and it was different and new and creative, and I just, like you were saying, I was enjoying myself and like present throughout the whole movie.
Well, the next category is villain. You want to go first?
Yes.
Okay, take it away.
I loved this villain. The first time you see him is horrifying and actually scary, and I made us rewind and then pause, because you only see him for like 1 second, but it really genuinely scared me. So to get over my fear of this villain, I had to rewind and pause it, so that I could see the full figure of the villain.
I liked the villain, but I wanted to see more of the villain. I wanted to learn a little bit more about him, or see the villain a little bit more near the end of the movie.
I gave it a 14 because of how creepy and quirky he was, and how kind of creative. He was on one hand very like childlike, and that was scary.
But then he evolves into
like,
more of a monster,
like a husband kind of role that really gave me a spook.
Well, I gave the villain a 12. And again, because I think he had room to grow. And when I saw this, I was like, it's going to be a sequel. But we just got confirmation there will likely be no sequel. I would have liked to have seen this character end up in like the Conjuring universe, like an affiliate. But anyway, I digress. Our next category, horror. This was a good category.
Oh, yeah.
This was good because this movie's got some jump scares, but it has I think, one of the greatest all-time jump scares. I'm not going to ruin anything about it, but when it happened, I was like, oh, my mouth is wide open. I was like, and I looked over, and her mouth was wide open.
We just sat in stunned silence, and I don't think we talked for like 2 minutes. And then we were like, that was crazy, right?
Yeah. So definitely has some scary parts, for sure. You want to say anything about horror before we give our scores on it?
I just was, like I said about that, the first time you see him, I was genuinely scared. She's alone in the bathtub with like candles lit all around, and just that slow suspense of some of the candles being blown out before you see the monster that you've been hearing about through the movie, and it was tense.
Even stuff
it
that
delivered.
You don't think, or stuff that isn't blatantly scary was scary. So I also gave it a 14. This is my second 14.
I gave it a 15.
All right. Well, let's talk about the effects in this movie, or the artistry, the music.
For me, it was about the music.
Music and sound was great.
Brittany, we'll have to get her name on the screen whenever we do this. But she managed to make the music fit like every scene in the mood perfectly, and
because there wasn't a lot of room or for practical effects. The sets were like just homes,
right?
So when looking for like, oh, like where's where can we give this artistry points, like it really came down to the Foley and the score for this movie were really well done. So it got 14 points for me in this category.
Yeah, 14 from me as well.
All right. We have one category to go as we're trucking along, so we can get this wrapped up in under 20 minutes. So we're going to move into the final bit of scoring. That is S Factor, where we can distribute points wherever we want for whatever reason. Yeah. Usually it's nudity, camp, originality.
It's anarchy.
Yeah.
Do whatever you want.
We got 20 flex points to kind of stick in.
I like this movie, and I can't explain it. Give it 20 points.
Ugh, that's excessive. But it's your right to do so if you choose to.
I gave it 11.
11 S Factor points.
I gave it 11 because the writing was really good. And I got a chance to talk to Brandon a little bit about his skills in writing this movie. But I just, as it was so easy to follow, number one, but there were some genuine emotions, and there was a deeper layer of the movie always going on than what you're seeing. And it was just really creative. There was probably one of the grossest weddings that I've ever, a very uncomfortable wedding scene. I'll never look at 2% milk the same way ever again.
Yeah, there hasn't been a creative use of milk in a movie like this since Ernest Scared Stupid.
Troll 2. I gave it 11, yeah. What did you do?
And I gave it another 14 points, again, just for being one of the best jump scares that I've ever seen in a movie. It stuck with me for a couple of days. I was like, I kept worrying, like, what am I worried about? Like, why am I having anxiety? And like, oh, you know what? It was that scene in that movie that's got me, so.
Like, if I took baths, I probably wouldn't be able to.
I wasn't even talking about the bath scene.
I know. I'm talking about the things that scared me. For a couple of days later, like if I took baths, I wouldn't have been able to do that for like 2 weeks after watching this.
So that about wraps things up. We're gonna go to Vanessa's one sentence synopsis.
Try sharing the triumphs and traumas of your own childhood with your children, but they'll probably get jealous and resent you for it.
And there you have it. So my total horror score for this movie is 68 points.
And I was 67, not far behind.
No, very close scoring.
A grand total of 67.5 points.
And again, we like to remind the viewers at home that that is not a failing grade. That is 67.5 reasons to watch this movie. Practically no movie that's ever been made will get 100. The highest we've done so far is pretty close to this. So that's all we have for you this week. Tune in next time for episode 11. Say goodbye, Vanessa.
Goodbye, Vanessa.
Hey, this is Brandon Christensen, the director of Z. Stay spooky.